In 2022, Vanguard released a study tracking account behavior across 4 million retirement investors. The top-performing accounts weren't managed by professionals. They weren't rebalanced quarterly. They belonged to people who had forgotten they had an account at all. Most people assume building wealth is about finding the right investment, the right fund, the right moment to get in. But the data keeps pointing somewhere else entirely. The people who end up with the most money aren't the ones who made the smartest moves. They're the ones who made the fewest. So why does staying still feel so wrong? That gap between what the math rewards and what your instincts tell you to do is driven by something most people never learn to see. There are 3 specific dollar thresholds in your financial life. 3 points where the math shifts so dramatically that the rules of the game actually change. Miss them, and you spend years working harder than you need to. Understand them, and you stop fighting the curve and start riding it. That's what this video is about. My name is Alex, and if you've ever watched your portfolio grow slowly for years and wondered when it actually starts working for you, stay with this, because the acceleration is already built into the math. And I'm going to show you exactly where the curve breaks in your favor and how to identify which phase you're in right now. Once you understand these 3 thresholds, you'll stop measuring your progress in dollars and start measuring it in momentum. The first shift starts with a question almost nobody thinks to ask, and it has everything to do with what happens the moment your portfolio crosses into exponential territory. Here's a question worth sitting with. At exactly what dollar amount does your portfolio start making more money in a single year than you actually put into it? Most people have never calculated that number, and most people have no idea how completely it changes everything once you cross it. Before we get there, understand why most people never see it coming. We are wired to think in straight lines. If you save $10,000 a year, your brain expects $100,000 after 10 years. Clean. Logical? Completely wrong. Because money that is invested does not add. It multiplies. And multiplication does not move in a straight line. It accelerates. Slowly at first, then violently. Look at how the timeline actually compresses. Starting from 0, reaching your first $100,000 takes roughly 7 to 8 years of consistent contributions at historical market averages. That stretch feels brutal, grinding, almost pointless at times. But the second $100,000 takes about 5 years. The jump from $200,000 to $400,000, around 4.5 years. The intervals are not shrinking because you are working harder. They are shrinking because the math is taking over from you. Charlie Munger said the first $100,000 is the hardest. People treat that as motivation. It is not. It is a mathematical observation. He was describing the moment before the crossover, the long flat section of the curve where your effort and the market's contribution are deeply unequal. You're doing almost all the work. The portfolio is doing almost nothing. That changes at a very specific moment. Say you are contributing $10,000 a year and your portfolio hits $100,000. At a historical average return of around 10%, the portfolio is now generating roughly $10,000 in growth on its own. Your annual contribution and your annual return are equal. For the first time, you are not the only one working. The math has finally shown up as a partner. That is tipping point 1, the crossover. Now here is where behavior enters the picture, because the math alone does not get you there. Consider 2 nurses, same hospital, same salary, same amount invested, same starting date. Call them Jordan and Priya. When markets dropped sharply in early 2020, Jordan kept her automatic contributions running and did not touch the account. Priya paused her contributions and moved a large portion to cash, planning to reinvest once things felt more stable. Jordan's portfolio currently sits near $210,000. Priya's is at $72,000. Same income, same starting point. The only difference was what each of them did during the 8 weeks of turbulence. Wealth does not grow in a straight line, and it does not wait for you to feel comfortable. The curve rewards the people who stay on it, not the ones who step off and try to time their return. This is worth saying plainly. The crossover point is not the finish line. It is the moment the game changes. Before it, you are the engine. After it, you and the math are pulling together. That shift in dynamic is real, and it compounds forward into everything that follows. But there is a problem almost nobody warns you about, because right after you hit that crossover, right when the math finally starts working in your favor, you enter the most psychologically dangerous stretch of the entire journey. The numbers are large enough to hurt when they drop, and not yet large enough to make you feel safe. That is the psychological danger zone, and it breaks more wealth-building trajectories than any market crash ever has. Nobody talks about what happens to your judgment when the numbers get big enough to scare you, but not big enough to protect you. That is the zone, and it is where most people quietly fall apart. You have crossed the crossover point. The math is finally working with you. You have built something real. Maybe $120,000, maybe $180,000, and then the market drops 15% in 6 weeks. You open the app and watch $40,000 disappear. Not a percentage on a chart. $40,000, money you spent years accumulating, gone in a month. Your brain does not process that as a temporary fluctuation. It processes it as a threat. This is the psychological danger zone, the stretch between roughly $100,000 and $300,000. And it is specifically brutal because of where it sits. Below this range, losses sting, but they feel recoverable. Above it, you have enough that a drop feels manageable relative to the total. But inside this band, you have just enough to feel the pain fully, and not quite enough to absorb it calmly. The math is accelerating. Your nerves are not. Here is the line that should follow you through this entire phase. Clarity is the most expensive word in investing. Every time the market looks chaotic, the instinct is to wait. Wait for things to make sense. Wait for the headlines to calm down. Wait for a clear signal. But by the time clarity arrives, prices have already recovered. You did not avoid the risk. You just bought back in at a higher price and missed the return. Consider someone like Daniel, a civil engineer in his mid-30s. He had built his portfolio to around $160,000 over 9 years of consistent contributions. Disciplined, patient. Then came a sharp correction. His balance dropped to roughly $94,000 in a matter of weeks. A colleague told him to preserve what was left and wait for stability. Daniel sold. He moved everything to cash and planned to re-enter when things looked better. 18 months later, had he stayed invested, his portfolio would have recovered to approximately $168,000. Instead, he re-entered late, bought back at higher prices, and sat at $109,000. The market did not take $60,000 from Daniel. His decision did. The crash was the setup. The exit was damaged. This is what makes the danger zone so insidious. It does not feel like a mistake when you make it. It feels like prudence. It feels like protecting what you built. The emotional logic is completely coherent, and it is exactly wrong. The people who get through this phase do not do it through willpower. Nobody has enough willpower to watch $90,000 vanish and feel nothing. They do it through structure. Automated contributions that run regardless of what the market is doing. Notifications turned off. A calendar reminder set 6 months out to check in, and nothing in between. The goal is to make the prudent action the default action, so that during the moments when your instincts are loudest, there is nothing left to decide. Bad markets inside this zone are not a problem to survive. They are an accumulation opportunity dressed in frightening clothing. Every contribution you make when prices are down is buying more of the curve at a discount. Get through this zone, stay on the curve long enough, and something shifts. The math stops adding and starts multiplying in a way that changes the question entirely. Because at a certain point, your portfolio does not just grow alongside your income. It starts to replace it. That is tipping point 2, the replacement. And it is where the rules of the game change completely. There is a number sitting inside your portfolio right now, or somewhere ahead of you on the curve, that most people walk right past without realizing what it means. Not because it is hidden, because nobody told them what to look for. The median household income in the United States currently sits at around $83,000 a year. That is what the typical American family brings home. It pays the mortgage, the groceries, the car, the kids' activities, and the occasional vacation. It is, for most people, the number their entire life is organized around, the number they trade time for, the number that determines what they can and cannot do. Now ask yourself this: what happens the day your portfolio generates that same number on its own? At a historical average return of 10%, you hit that output at roughly an $837,000 portfolio. Your money is earning what you earn. Not approximately, not close. The same number. And it did it without you waking up, commuting, sitting in a meeting, or answering a single email. That is tipping point 2, the replacement. The word replacement is deliberate. This is not about quitting your job. Most people who hit this threshold do not quit. What changes is subtler and more powerful than that. You start operating from a completely different position. You say no to the project that would have consumed 6 months of your life for a mediocre raise. You push back on the client who treats you poorly because you can afford to lose the account. You take the sabbatical. You make the career change you have been postponing for 4 years. The portfolio is not paying your bills yet, but it is sitting behind you like a silent partner. And that changes every negotiation you walk into. Think about what this looks like in practice. Take someone like Rachel, a marketing director in her early 40s. She had spent 15 years building toward this point. Consistent contributions, stayed through 2 major downturns, let the curve do its work. When her portfolio crossed $850,000, her annual return exceeded her salary for the first time. She did not hand in her notice, but she did turn down a promotion that came with a title, a raise, and 70-hour weeks. A year earlier, she would have felt she had no choice but to take it. Now she did. That is what the replacement actually looks like, not retirement. Optionality. Here is where the math gets almost hard to believe. Push a little further to $1 million. If you are still contributing $10,000 a year at that point, your personal contribution now represents roughly 10% of your total annual portfolio growth. The portfolio is generating $100,000. You're adding $10,000. You're almost irrelevant to your own wealth building at this stage. The math has taken over so completely that your physical effort is a rounding error. But this threshold carries its own quiet danger, and it is one worth naming directly. When money starts to feel abundant, when the balance looks comfortable, and the returns feel automatic, lifestyle has a way of expanding to meet it. A bigger house, a nicer car, upgraded everything. Each decision feels reasonable. Collectively, they push your finish line further away without you noticing. Lifestyle inflation does not announce itself. It just silently raises the number you need to sustain. Which is exactly why tipping point 3 is not just about accumulation. It is about the relationship between what your portfolio produces and what your life actually costs. That ratio, not the raw balance, is what defines the final threshold, the one where work becomes genuinely optional. That is tipping point 3, freedom. And the math behind it is simpler than most people expect. Most people picture financial independence as a single moment, a day you circle on a calendar, a balance you hit, a resignation letter you send, a last commute you take, clean, decisive, final. That picture is almost entirely wrong, and believing it actually makes the goal harder to reach. Financial independence is not a cliff edge. It is a zone, a wide, expanding zone of optionality, where work becomes a choice rather than a requirement. And the entry point into that zone is defined not by how much you have accumulated, but by a single ratio, what your portfolio produces versus what your life actually costs. This is where the 4% rule comes in. The 4% rule comes from the Trinity study, a piece of research conducted at Trinity University that examined historical market returns across multiple decades and multiple market cycles. The finding was this: a properly invested portfolio can sustain an annual withdrawal of 4% of its initial value, adjusted for inflation each year after that, indefinitely. Not for 20 years, not until the next crash, indefinitely. Across every historical period the researchers tested, including the Great Depression, the 1970s stagflation, and the dot-com collapse. The math to find your number is straightforward. Take your annual expenses and multiply by 25. That is your target. A lifestyle that costs $80,000 a year requires a $2 million portfolio. A lifestyle that costs $50,000 a year requires $1.25 million. Same rule. Completely different finish lines. And here is the part that changes how you think about spending. Every dollar you remove from your annual expenses does 2 things simultaneously. It reduces what you need to live on, and it reduces the portfolio size required to sustain that life. Cut your annual spending by $10,000, and your independence number drops by $250,000. That is not a budgeting tip. That is a structural acceleration of your finish line. The math works in both directions, and most people only focus on one of them. Consider someone like Marcus, a software architect currently in his late 40s. He spent years targeting a $2 million portfolio based on a lifestyle costing $80,000 a year. Then he and his partner did something most people resist. They audited every recurring expense with fresh eyes. Subscription services they barely used. A car payment on a second vehicle that sat idle most of the week. Dining patterns had quietly inflated over a decade of rising income. They brought their actual annual spending down to $62,000 without changing anything that genuinely mattered to them. Their new independence number dropped to 1.55 million. They crossed it 14 months later than their original projection would have suggested, except their original projection had them working 3 additional years to reach 2 million. The recalibration saved them nearly 2 years of mandatory work, not through deprivation, through precision. This is what freedom actually looks like in practice. Not extreme frugality, not a dramatic lifestyle sacrifice. A clear-eyed understanding of what your life costs versus what you have told yourself it costs. Those two numbers are rarely the same. And freedom, once reached, does not mean the portfolio stops growing. Most people in this zone continue working in some form. Consulting, part-time, passion projects. The difference is that the income is optional. The portfolio is already doing the work. You are just choosing what to do with your time, which brings everything into focus. 3 tipping points. 3 moments where the math shifts and the rules change. Seeing them individually is useful, but seeing how they connect, how each one compresses the timeline toward the next, is where the full picture finally comes together. That is exactly what the full arc reveals. Step back for a moment, not to recap, to see something that is invisible when you're inside any one of these phases, but becomes obvious the moment you look at all 3 together. 3 tipping points. 3 moments where the math shifts. But look at what else shifts. The intervals between them compress in a way that mirrors exactly what happened inside Section 1 with the timeline. Getting from 0 to the crossover takes years of grinding contributions, where your effort is doing almost all the work. Getting from the crossover to the replacement moves faster. The math is pulling alongside you now, covering more ground per year than your paycheck ever could, and getting from the replacement to freedom faster still, because by that point, the portfolio is generating 6 figures annually on its own, and your contributions have become nearly irrelevant to the outcome. The curve does not just accelerate your balance, it accelerates the distance between thresholds. Each phase is shorter than the one before it. Each one requires less from you than the last. That is the shape of the journey. And most people never see it because they are measuring the wrong thing. They check their balance monthly. They compare it to the last quarter. They feel good when it is up and anxious when it is down. But the balance is not the signal. The phase you're in is the signal, because each phase has different rules, different risks, and a completely different relationship between your effort and your outcome. In the crossover phase, your only job is to stay on the curve and not exit. In the danger zone, your only job is to automate and ignore. At the replacement threshold, your job shifts to protecting the trajectory from lifestyle inflation. At freedom, your job is to know your actual number and stop moving the target. Different phases, different jobs, same curve. Here's the thread running through all of it. The math never changed. It was always going to compound. It was always going to accelerate. It was always going to compress the intervals and reduce what it needed from you over time. The only variable, at every single tipping point, was whether you stayed on the curve or stepped off it. Jordan stayed on it and hit 210,000. Priya stepped off and sat at 72,000. Daniel stepped off in the danger zone and cost himself $60,000 in 18 months. Rachel stayed on through 2 downturns and arrived at a point where she could turn down a promotion without a second thought. Marcus recalibrated his expenses and crossed his freedom threshold nearly 2 years ahead of schedule. Different people, different decisions, same underlying math. The curve was always there. The question was always the same one. Are you going to stay on it? That question is not rhetorical. It is the most practical thing in this entire video. Because the math is not the hard part. Running the numbers takes 10 minutes. The hard part is what you do during the 8 weeks when your balance drops $40,000. And every financial headline is telling you the system is broken. The hard part is not expanding your lifestyle the moment your portfolio starts feeling comfortable. The hard part is knowing your actual independence number instead of a vague aspirational figure you have never calculated, which is exactly what the next steps are for. 3 equations, 15 minutes, and by the end of them, you will know precisely which phase you are in and what your only job is from here. Most financial advice ends with a feeling, a sense of clarity that fades by the following morning because nothing concrete anchored it. This section is not that. 3 equations, Specific numbers. Precise answer to the question of where you actually stand right now. Grab a calculator or a notes app, whatever is in front of you. The first equation is your portfolio ratio. Take your current portfolio balance and divide it by your annual contribution. If you are investing $10,000 a year and your balance is $80,000, your ratio is 8. That single number tells you more about where you are on the curve than your balance ever could. Here is how to read it. A ratio under 10 means you are in the grind phase. The crossover point, where your portfolio starts matching your annual contribution and returns, is still ahead of you. That is not a problem, it is a phase. Your only job right now is to keep contributing and completely ignore the noise. Do not check the app daily. Do not adjust based on headlines. Automate and wait. The math is not broken. It is just early. A ratio between 10 and 25 means you are in the acceleration zone. Your returns are starting to outpace your contributions. The curve is bending in your favor. This is where the danger zone lives, where losses feel large enough to act on, but the portfolio is not yet big enough to feel secure. Your job here is to protect the trajectory. Automate contributions. Build the habit of not deciding anything during a down market. The people who get through this phase intact are the ones who made the important decisions before the turbulence started. A ratio above 25 means the portfolio is doing the heavy lifting. Your contributions at this point are a small fraction of the total annual growth. Your job shifts from accumulation to protection, specifically protecting the portfolio from lifestyle inflation and from your own emotional responses to volatility. At this stage, the biggest risk is not the market, it is you. The second equation is your replacement threshold. Take your current gross annual salary and multiply it by 10. That is the portfolio size at which your investments, at a 10% historical average return, generate income equal to what you earn from work. If you earn $94,000 a year, your replacement threshold is $940,000. That is the number where tipping point 2 becomes real for you personally, not a concept, a specific target with your name on it. The third equation is your independence number. Take your actual annual expenses, not your income, your expenses, and multiply by 25. Be honest about this number. Include everything: housing, food, transport, subscriptions, travel, and the irregular costs that only show up twice a year, but are entirely predictable. If your annual spending is $71,000, your independence number is $1.775 million. That is your finish line. Everything before it is progress toward it. Now look at all three numbers together. Your ratio tells you which phase you are in. Your replacement threshold tells you where tipping point 2 sits for your specific income. Your independence number tells you the exact portfolio size where work becomes optional for your specific life. 3 numbers. Complete picture. One question worth sitting with after this. Every one of the people in this video, Jordan, Daniel, Rachel, Marcus, started in the grind phase with a ratio under 10. The math did not separate them. The behavior did, which raises something worth exploring in the next video, because there is a specific reason why some investors consistently stay on the curve, while others, with identical portfolios and identical incomes, keep stepping off it. The answer has nothing to do with discipline. It has to do with how the financial system is actually structured around your decisions. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Here's what this video was really about. Not 3 numbers, not a set of equations. The actual insight is this: the math was always going to work. It was designed to accelerate, to compress, to do more with less over time. The only thing that ever interrupted it was a decision made during a moment of fear or comfort. That is the realization worth keeping. A few things to carry forward. Wealth does not grow in a straight line. It grows in phases, and each phase has a different job. Curve rewards staying on it more than almost anything else you can do. Your expenses are not passive. They actively determine how far you have to travel. And the portfolio ratio matters more than the balance. Know which phase you're in. Look at your own financial behavior with honest eyes. Where are you on the curve right now? Are you in the grind, the acceleration zone, or approaching the replacement threshold? And more importantly, what decisions are you making that belong to a different phase than the one you're actually in? There's a reason some investors consistently stay on the curve while others keep stepping off it. That pattern runs deeper than discipline. It connects directly to how the financial industry is structured around your behavior. And that is exactly where the next video picks up.